So today's topic is about goodness in medical and health related research. And I am going to present to you one way of addressing the different dimensions of goodness in medical and health related research. But in the first slide, you will see what is the inventory of this lecture. First, we are going to take a look at what I call the tension between the epistemological and ethical ethos of research. I will explain what I mean by that. Then, the concept of goodness in medical and health-related research. And then I will use examples of research ethics questions and themes taken from a variety of PhD students whom I have been teaching throughout many years. When we look at the history of medical and health-related research, it is clear that this is a narrative with inherent tensions. The epistemological objective or ethos of such research is the generation of effective diagnostic, treatment, and prevention methods. And the ethical ethos or the ethical objective of the same enterprise is the attempt to protect the interests and well-being of patients and healthy individuals involved in such research. And between these two objectives, there will always be some kind of tension. What do I mean by ethos here? Well, ethos are used in the meaning of accepted standards. And in research, we have at least two such standards. By standard, I mean norms and principles that are at play. First, we have the epistemological norms and principles. For example, the aim of all kinds of research is to generate new knowledge, some kind of new knowledge, that is, some kind of truth. Or in medical and health-related research, many use statistical methods. So the aim is to generate justifiable probabilities. Other epistemological norms are coherence. For example, when you write an academic paper, the paper has to be written in such a way that the message comes out as coherent. Also, not the least in medical and health-related research, it is important that the kind of research you want to conduct is perceived by funding agencies, by political authorities, by health authorities as relevant, fruitful, utile in some way. Then we have the other type of standards, namely ethical norms and standards. For example, we have been discussing last week some of these ethical principles: autonomy, dignity, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, truthfulness, trust, vulnerability, and solidarity. When conducting research, there is always a danger of moral blindness, of abusive research, and violation of human rights. Why? Here are some bullet points to indicate why. First, the power and influence of the individual researcher or the research group. Second, the dependent situation of populations chosen as research subjects. Third, the net perception of a national necessity or government pressure to conduct research. Well, we have experienced every country in the world the recent COVID COVID-19 pandemic. And that's the reason I have highlighted this bullet point, because during the pandemic, some forms of research were conducted in ways that did not align with the core ethical principles of research. Fourth, the perception of an urgent and overriding scientific need. For example, the race to develop useful vaccines during the pandemic. Fifth, extreme detachment and lack of any sense of sympathy with the fate of research subjects. Unfortunately, during the history of medical and health-related research, a lot of research subjects have experienced such lack of sense of sympathy. The perception that some people are expendable or already terminal. The perception that some populations should be excluded from social concern. For example, still today, it is a delicate issue. Is it justifiable to use prisoners as research subjects? And at least the kind of consensus that seems to exist now is that only to research diseases and ailments that affect in particular prisoners, then it can be justifiable. And then secrecy. There is a lot of secret research going on in the world, both in the global north and in the global south, namely the kind of medical and health-related research going on within military contexts. And that is, from a research ethics point of view, extremely delicate and problematic. I will come back to why that is problematic. The Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, Article 3.1, is an extremely important article. I quote, "The interest and welfare of the individual should have priority over the sole interest of science or society." This I label the normative bedrock of medical and health-related research. That is, that in situations where there are both interests on part of the society, on part of the researchers, these interests should never be given higher priority than the interest and welfare of the individual research subject. And this principle is under pressure from powerful stakeholders in the global north. When we talk about goodness in research, I use to pose this question to my PhD students or to researchers I teach. How many of you have the ambition of becoming good, really good researchers? Or for those of you who are members of research ethics committees, how many of you have the ambition of becoming really good members of research ethics committees? When I ask this question, most participants raise their hands and admit, yes, I have this ambition. But then the tricky question is, what is this thing called goodness? What do we mean by goodness in general? And what do we mean by goodness in medical and health-related research? I will unpack this concept using insights from a book by a Finnish philosopher, Georg Henrik von Wright, because in his book entitled The Varieties of Goodness, he studied the word good, and he starts by saying, let's take a look at expressions of goodness we use in everyday life. And he says, we are all familiar with everyday expressions such as a good knife, a good horse, a good hammer, a good road, a good carpenter, a good chess player. Norway has the best chess player in the world. A good politician. They exist. A good teacher, a good lover, good eyes, good lung, good sight, good teeth, good memory, a good head. And then I have stipulated a line, I will tell you why. A good heart, a good taste, a good smell, a good meal, a good plan, a good opportunity, good advice, good luck, good news, a good man, a good act, and then comes again, a good heart, a good friend, a good physician, a good researcher, good knowledge, good research, good afternoon. And I have put question marks behind this because what does that mean? And while I'm now continuing this lecture, think about if you have, and I suppose all of you have at least one good friend. What is it that characterizes a good friend? What kind of goodness is that? Now we will return to this list of everyday expressions, and we are going to try to characterize these expressions in types of goodness. And von Wright put these four together. Why did he do that? What is it that makes a knife good? What is it that makes it reasonable to put the horse, the hammer, and rod together with the first expression? Well, von Wright's answer is that the first group contain all the uses of good of instrumental character. That is, we speak of a good knife, a good hammer, a good razor, and other artifacts which are used as means, that is, as instruments for various purposes. That raises the question, is instrumental goodness in research important? Well, this represents the form of goodness of evident relevance within science and research. And instrumental goodness is important not only in laboratory research. I know some of you might be doing that kind of research. It has a role to play also in research employing animals or man-made models to unravel the mysteries of basic mechanisms at play in living organisms, or in quantitative studies employing statistical methods, as well as in qualitative studies involving semi-structured or in-depth interviews. In fact, in such studies, the researcher is using herself as an instrument. We all know that some people are much better at listening to others, making others talk, than others. And to be a good qualitative researcher, you must be able to make your informants share the information you hope to be able to cover. But this does not imply that goodness in research can be fully sorted out by confining our investigation to an instrumental dimension. Other forms of goodness must be taken into consideration as well. And that brings me to some quotes that illustrate this from my PhD students. Getting hold of a robust routine that allows for correct ways of conducting an experiment. That is a phrase that addresses this dimension of goodness. Or the second, planning out an experiment carefully from start to finish and also understanding why am I doing the experiment in the first place. of this one, the first challenge I had in developing my PhD protocol is finding a suitable tool, questionnaire, that is an instrument, to measure health-related quality of life that is tested and validated in the local setting. The tool that is also very sensitive to measure the impact of medication-related problems. Then let's move to the second type of goodness and to another list of everyday expressions that von Wright has put together. A good carpenter, a good chess player, a good politician, a good teacher, a good lover, a good mistress. Why has he put these 5 expressions together? What is the common denominator of these 5 expressions? Well, say, von Wright, they are all good at something. And that which the members of the second group are good at is some activity or art for which a man or a woman may possess a natural talent, but in which the person in possession will also have to undergo some special training before she can excel in it. And for this kind of excellence or goodness, von Wright uses the label technical goodness. And that raises the question, is technical goodness also an important goodness dimension in research? Although it's not simple to give a contentful answer to the question what exactly makes a researcher good in the technical sense of the word, it is nonetheless justified to say that technical goodness represents a sine qua non kind of excellence that cannot be done without. It is a necessary kind of goodness if a researcher is to qualify as a good researcher. And to illustrate how this dimension displays its role in the process of generating scientific knowledge, we are going to take a closer look at the 3 phases that constitute the research process. My professor in philosophy, Knut Erik Tranøy, suggests this differentiation between 3 phases. We first have the search phase or the planning phase of research. Then second, we have the acquisition phase, that is when we acquire and interpret data that has been collected. And third, the use or application or communication of the scientific findings. And let's now have a look at how the dimension of technical goodness comes into play in these 3 different phases. For example, in the planning phase, the ability to identify the kind of questions and methodologies best suited to research a particular problem represents a form of goodness in the technical kind. That's also a kind of goodness that is extremely important to apply when doing the so-called review part of a research paper, where you look at former research related to the kind of research you are doing to be able to identify research questions that have not yet been addressed. Then technical goodness is important. Likewise, in the acquisition phase of research, the ability to sift through large amounts of carefully collected data and provide interpretations that are both plausible and fruitful demonstrate the position of technical goodness. And then, in the third phase, the communication and application phase of research, technical goodness is required to make the message come through in ways that give rise to enhance understanding in the scientific community, and preferably also in the community at large. Or to say it in a very practical way, technical goodness is extremely important when you write a paper. That is, you write the paper in such a way that the core message comes through, and you write the paper in such a way that it is accessible to your scientific colleagues, but also you have an obligation to share the results also with a broader audience. And then you need not to use a hermetic scientific language. You have to use everyday language. For example, when you want to recruit research subjects for a project, then many researchers say, if you participate in this research, I assure you that when the research has been conducted and published, I will tell you the results. But then it's not sufficient to send a copy of the published paper to the research subjects, because most research subjects will not understand what is written. You have to translate the results in such a way that it is understandable to non-scientific individuals. And that requires technical goodness. And here are some quotes from my PhD students. The first bullet point, well, there is a misspelling here, but lack of enough statistic knowledge at the beginning of the project. Many young researchers find statistics difficult to understand and apply. And for some of them, they feel that statistics is some kind of statistics. Lack of sufficient knowledge on statistical analysis, lack of skill sets. Certain operations are very technical, and the unavailability of skilled persons can restrict acquiring data. This is a young surgeon researcher. Interpretation of epidemiological data is challenging and needs to be done carefully. Hence, formulating conclusions and outlining possible mechanisms is a challenge when writing manuscripts. Again, this is a challenge alluding to technical goodness and its importance. To learn how to organize your results, how to organize them, and how to explain them to people, especially people not involved directly in the same topic. To get excellent communication skills, writing scientific papers as well as oral presentations is a good goal that I have as a PhD student. This is also a quote alluding to the importance of technical goodness in research. With such a large data set and with so many variables covered, it is difficult to define clear and precise research questions that will make up a coherent PhD. It has been a challenge to refresh my statistical knowledge and apply this to my data in an exploratory phase. Let's then move to the third type of goodness and the next group of everyday expressions that von Wright lists in his book. A good lung, good eyes, good sight, good teeth, good memory, a good head. What is the common denominator of these expressions? What kind of goodness are we talking about here? What we're talking about here is the kind of goodness most characteristic, I would say, for medical and health-related research. All kinds of medical and health-related research study functions or dysfunctions. Von Wright called this medical goodness. I think a better expression, better label is functional goodness. Some researchers study functions or dysfunctions on nano level or on cellular level or on organ level or on the mental level, or the organoid level. This is a kind of new research where researchers use cells and make cells cluster so they function as a body more complex than a unique cell, but less complex than an organ. And the aim of this kind of research, one aim of this kind of research is, if one succeed with developing organoids for research, it might be that it will be possible to reduce the amount of research animals. And also, researchers doing healthcare system research are studying functions or dysfunctions and try to generate knowledge that might lead to enhanced function of the healthcare system. So many, if not all, forms of medical and health-related research seems to fall in this category, in the sense that promoting functional understanding or understanding that may be used to reduce functional ailment is their primary aim. Now we are going to reflect on the fourth type of goodness, and my claim is that this is the most delicate and challenging dimension of goodness in research. And the everyday expressions that von Wright use is a good taste, a good smell, a good meal. So what is the common denominator for these three everyday expressions? Von Wright used an ancient Greek word to label this kind of goodness. He calls it hedonic goodness. Hedone means pleasure. That is, we speak of a good smell or taste, a good meal, a good wine, a good cigar, a good holiday, good time, good weather. All these expressions alludes to some kind of pleasure, or think within the context of research, the pleasure of having a paper accepted for publication, or the pleasure of having succeeded in the defense of your PhD, or the pleasure of receiving funding for a new kind of research you want to conduct. All these kinds of experiences are experiences that generate some kind of pleasure. So what is the relevance of hedonic goodness in research? My claim is that this goodness dimension deserves much more attention than hitherto given, because researchers live substantial parts of their lives in ambiences not only characterized by the freedom to seek knowledge, but also by tough competition, temporary forms of insecurity, and by ignorance. And to make such ambiences flourish requires that attention is paid to the cognitive needs and intellectual aspirations of individual researchers, but also to their need for being taken care of in periods of envy, frustration, insecurity, and pain. And the opposite of pleasure is exactly pain. Thus, coping with the pleasure of having a paper accepted for publication, or a PhD dissertation accepted for defense, or of receiving new funding in a way that acknowledges the contribution of one's helpers, this represents probably a much less delicate matter than sharing the pains and responsibilities of a colleague who has failed in her aspirations to deliver according to the expectations of her professors. And here are some expressions or some experiences shared by my PhD students. I did not encounter any challenges nor problems by far. Everything is going better than I expected. Well, that is a wonderful experience, but quite rare. I have just started, so I haven't had time to encounter any problems. Understanding, writing, and speaking academic English. This is a great challenge for me, as I have little experience in speaking with people who do not have Norwegian as their first language. Then the other one, how to cope with nerves and a feeling of little contribution at project meetings. The challenge of finding acceptance of and motivation despite the unimaginable time everything takes, from the very beginning of an article through the revisions, the referees, and the publishing process. So the reason why I put so much emphasis on this dimension of hedonic goodness, or the pleasure-pain dimension in research, is that it is constantly under-communicated, that pain and pleasure are experiences that every researcher will experience many times. Think about if you have the ambition of becoming a good researcher, a really good researcher, an excellent researcher, an outstanding researcher, what does that mean? Yes, it means, for example, to be the first one to enter a terrain that has not been hitherto researched. There is no map which tells you how to move in this terrain. You are going to write that map. And I ask my PhD students, how many of you like to feel uncertain, to feel limited with regard to knowledge about the terrain you are going to enter? And most of them say, no, I don't like that. But if you really have the ambition of becoming a good researcher, you have to teach yourself to learn to live constantly with uncertainty, because that is a fact. When you try to unveil something new, when you enter a terrain where you are the first one to enter, it is you who are writing the map. And you have to rely on your own capabilities. And in this process, everyone will go through situations of uncertainty, situations of pain, situations where you feel limited. Let's then move to the fifth or second last type of goodness. And von Wright put these everyday expressions together: a good plan, a good opportunity, good advice, good luck, good news. What is the common denominator for these 5 expressions of goodness? And here is von Wright's answers. When we speak of a good plan, a good opportunity, a good advice, good luck, good news, we are usually thinking of something which is useful or advantage for some purpose or pursuit. The beneficial could be distinguished from the merely useful by saying that the useful is that which favors some end or purpose in general, and beneficial that which promotes the special end, which is the good of some being. So beneficial goodness or utility goodness is the label that von Wright used. And medical and health-related research needs, in order to, for example, receive funding, needs to show that it will be of some utility. It will represent some kind of beneficence. If not, you will never get funding to do a research project within the context of medical and health-related research. So the utility requirement is fundamental in medical and health-related research. And when you develop a research project, when you apply for funding, if you do not take the utility requirement seriously and indicate in your proposal that the kind of research I plan to do will be of some utility, of some kind of beneficence. If not, you will not get funding. So, not without good reasons, beneficence and utility have always been granted with particular attention in medical and health-related research. And suffice it here to recall situations aimed at securing funding or promoting political and/or public interest and understanding for one's research, or of gaining permission from an ethics committee to go further with a clinical trial. In such situations, reference to some sort of expected benefit and/or utility often proves to represent the decisive move. Finally, the sixth type of goodness. And here, von Wright put three everyday expressions: a good man, a good act, a good heart. What kind of goodness are we talking about here? Well, this is a course on research ethics. So this sixth dimension of goodness is about moral goodness. And here again, to refer to what von Wright says, a last form of users of good refers to matters of conduct and character. That is, uses of good related to the so-called moral life of man. From this view, a man can be good and do good. And here I'm using man not in the sense of males, but man in the sense of individuals belonging to humanity. That is, good is usually done to somebody, and when a man does good to some being, his or her acts or deeds are frequently, though not always, called good as well. So what is then the relevance of moral goodness in medical and health-related research on part of an individual being involved in research, when comparing it with the other 5 forms of goodness that I have listed during this lecture? The short version answer is that moral goodness is necessary for maintaining confidence between individuals in a research ambience, or between research communities, as well as between individual researchers, research communities, their research subjects, and the community at large. Consequently, a research ambience without such an asset is doomed to fail in ways of a more serious nature than if its weakness was related to one or several of the other forms of goodness previously mentioned. So to become a good researcher, you have to excel in all these 6 dimensions of goodness. It is, for sure, moral goodness in research is extremely important, not the least to build trust and confidence between you as a researcher and your research subjects, research informants. Also to build trust and confidence between you and your research colleagues, but also wider speaking, build trust and maintain trust in relation to funding agencies, in relation to the health authorities, in relation to the communities at large. Last week, we had a very important discussion in the Forum of Deliberation on indigenous communities and populations and indigenous individuals used in research. And we know that a huge challenge relates to the dimension of trust and confidence, how to build trust and confidence with individuals belonging to different indigenous communities, illiterate communities, vulnerable communities. And here are some examples of moral goodness in research, which my PhD students have suggested. Honesty, for sure. Objectivity, social responsibility. I will end this lecture by showing you some examples of ethic themes that I have taken from PhD students' own projects, PhD students at the medical faculty at the University of Oslo. And here are type 1 examples where some of the students have answered in this way. My project have no ethical challenges, no any ethical issues that have been encountered. As the study does not involve taking samples, there is no anticipated ethical problem. Ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects. Project needed ethical approval. No known ethical issues in this project. No that much concerning ethical problem. There are minimal ethical issues relating to the implementation of the project. Nil. No. How should one characterize such answers? Well, is this a typical hello man X handle answer, or rather, good day, man X handle, meaning that something is like talking to the wall? Or a second level answer, well, since my project has been approved by the Research Ethics Committee or the National Data Service for Social Science Research, there are no ethical problems in this project. Is this a disclaimer, or is it an appropriate answer to a stupid question posed by me? A poetic way of characterizing such answers is this, and I will first read it in Swedish because it comes from a Swedish poet who in 1964 was honored with the Nobel Prize in Literature. It comes from a science fiction poem entitled Aniara. Till skänks har spräcken lik en kärna blänkt, min vän, du vet för mycket utan att ha tänkt. As a gift, a star has been blinking. My friend, you know too much without ever having thought about it. And these answers from the PhD students, where they say, no problems or any ethical problem in my project, is a result they have not thought sufficiently about the ethical challenges in their project. Or another poetic way of characterizing this denial comes from the book of exhortations, which José Saramago, a Portuguese author, writer, use on the first page of his novel Blindness. Also, José Saramago was honored with a Nobel Prize in Literature. If you can see, look. If you can look, observe. And then there are many students that point to ethical challenges in the project. The project is solely focused to use human sample materials. The samples materials are collected after surgical resection from patients' cohorts. I feel absolutely imperative to take part human sample materials for exploring novel findings. And then a question related to the storage of such biological examples. Can we store the collected samples of human tissue forever? Can we share the collected data with whoever we want? And then there are many who address the challenges related to informed consent. The concept of informed written consent is also a relevant theme to our project. Informed consent is a cornerstone of ethical research, and in my opinion, rarely open to debate when it involves procedures and treatments that have direct consequences for the patient. Exceptions being a life-saving treatment being performed on an unconscious person or some similar circumstance. One could wonder, however, how vital it should be when working with patient samples that have been taken as part of a diagnostic procedure without additional risks or consequence to the patient. The samples in this study, for example, were taken during the normal diagnostic routine of these patients' treatment. These patients have given their consent to the medical procedures under which the samples were taken, and the samples were taken in the exact manner they would have been taken, regardless of inclusion in our study. These patients were, in fact, not included in the study until after the specimens were taken and they were seen to meet the study's criteria. And the aim of the study is to improve the diagnostic procedure. So here the student is unsure, should we then seek informed consent for making use of these samples, not for diagnostic reasons, but for research reasons. And here three others related to informed consent. In the quantitative part, I will measure hemoglobin level for girls using portable hemoglobinometers, that is capillary finger prick. What type of ethical approval is needed? Should I have a separate consent form for this? Or informed consent in relation to severely ill psychotic patients? To obtain consent from the subjects involved in a reasonable manner, also to inform the persons on any uncertainties involved with sampling. Patients may feel an obligation to participate in the study when asked by researchers who also work clinically and are closely involved in the patient's medical or rehabilitative treatment. Yes, this is a very delicate challenge. Is it justifiable that you, as a researcher who happens to be also the clinician of the individuals you want to involve in your research project, is it justifiable that you are the one who seek their informed consent? Then a type 4 challenge. We want to include both adults and children and therefore need an informed consent from the parents on behalf of their children. To do research on young children in general, consent is to be given by parents. My target population is adolescent girls, 15 to 18 years old. Do I need parental consent to interview them? What are the situations that I can waive parental consent, and how can we protect the girls? Well, here, for sure, depending on in which country, culture, community this kind of research is conducted, the answer to these questions will be different. Minority populations, this can be a sensitive issue. However, our study has a participatory approach where migrant women's own perceptions are illuminated. During the publication and dissemination process of results, efforts will be made to not stigmatize particular populations, subgroups, or reinforce ethnic racial stereotypes. Pregnant migrant women are particularly vulnerable. Then many of these PhD students, they are doing some kind of research using animals. And the use of animals in itself is perceived by many of these young researchers as ethically challenging. What criteria must be met for it to be acceptable ethically to utilize animals in research towards treatment of human disease? The 3 R's are relevant if I will be conducting experiments in the future. The experimental animal model has become an important part of basic biology research. The advent of translational research from mice to man has the strength of increasing the understanding of disease causes and therapeutic interventions. There are also some disadvantages of using animal models, such as displaying no animal model is completely perfect to mimic human disease progression, and sometimes it can be expensive to create mouse models and host them. A burning issue to take into consideration of animal welfare when we use animal-like mouse in translational research purposes. And as I mentioned earlier in this lecture, organoid research, one of the aims of this kind of research is to develop research models that mimic in a more precise way human disease progression than animal models. And also the objective is then to reduce the use of animals and the sacrifice of animals for research. And then many young researchers who are doing their PhD, they feel that they have a restricted period of 3 years for funding, and they feel everything goes so slow. When I first come last year thinking that I will have some course, I stayed there for 3 months and no course, since all of them were in Norwegian. I can't find interesting courses for the elective component of my training. I couldn't be able to get enough courses. And then this type of challenges, all medical research subjects should be given the option of being informed about the general outcome and results of the study. How ethical is it to let the patient know about, for example, certain susceptibility genes or mutations that might never have any actual physiological outcome and make the patient live in fear that something might happen? If the girls turn to have abnormal hemoglobin levels, do I have to intervene? We might also find types of not formally known hereditary amyloidosis that may have implications for not only the patient who signed the consent, but also their family members. This could be information that will lead to the possibility of early treatment in the future and watchful follow-up. And further, possible genetic findings unrelated to the particular disease we are studying. Discovering a subject's potential risk of disease during a study. So the issue of incidental findings is a very delicate ethical challenge. Then, for sure, risk-benefit estimations are extremely important in research. And here are some examples: safety of dental materials, chemical hazard and risk assessment, waste disposal procedures. Abnormal findings in the brains of psychotic patients can be used to marginalize the group even more than it already is. Do we sometimes make healthy persons sick with our extensive examinations? Then the challenge related to handling of sensitive data. The present study grants us access to the journals of prospective study subjects. Protection of patient information and patient confidentiality are, of course, of paramount importance, and it has been a theme throughout the study's approval process. Whenever a researcher gains access to a patient journal, their inquiry is logged and visible to the patient. The access we are allowed to carry with it an inherent responsibility to perform our inquiries within the needs of our project, and we would not have been given this access without a legitimate need for it. For me, this raises the question of whether the logging of every inquiry is truly necessary. I would imagine that it might be unsettling for some patients, especially those excluded from the study based on the specifics of their clinical information, thus never even having been approached to be a subject in the study. Protection of personal data. Sensitivity of the data. Is it necessary to protect all of sequencing data? And then the truth, honesty considerations. Our research is concerned only with theoretical and computational work combined with DNA sequence analysis of bacteria, which are not subject to the standard ethical regulation in medical research. Therefore, the research ethics questions, themes that have to be considered in our project apply to all other fields of research as well. Some examples. Publishing our work proceeds in good faith by authors and the journals. And the student is referring to the Vancouver rules for authorship, which I will talk about in a later lecture. Adhering to commonly established research values, verifiability of results, justification of methodology, etc., integrity of the work, no fraud or plagiarism, impartiality, openly declaring conflicts of interest, etc. And here, the same challenge, despite insufficient scientific evidence from randomized controlled trials, TLE, it's the acronym here used, was adopted in clinics across Europe and used as an advertising gimmick to attract infertile couples. This new technology is promoted as the magic cure and is offered to patients on a regular basis, charging vulnerable couples large sums of money and providing them false hope, may pushing the limits. The ethical obligation to represent and interpret data in a scientifically honest way, utilizing statistical techniques correctly to the best of one's ability. Plagiarism in research is a prevalent challenge. All experiments data must be accurate and repeatable and have no cheat. The image analysis is not completely objective. And then the challenges in relation to supervisors. Losing research advisor temporarily at the critical time. Lack of communication with the supervisor being too busy with his own projects, having not much time left for his students. At times lacking communication due to absent or very busy supervisors, and how to select the right supervisors, how to ensure sufficient supervision from busy supervisors. Then the ethical challenge that is most prevalent in medical and health-related research, the issue of co-authorship. Authorship and co-authorship in medical and health-related research. This PhD project is embedded in an interdisciplinary approach called convergence environment, where different research groups collaborate in order to achieve a common goal. Since many different researchers will be involved, this project is particularly susceptible to disagreements during the decision of the list of authors. The Vancouver guidelines state this: the evaluation methods of this project involves a lot of collaboration with other research groups to get results. So what are the limits, guidelines when we need to think about authorship? In which order and when we actually need to acknowledge the collaboration party? This needs to be discussed openly while the collaboration starts, so everyone knows to be on the same page. So there won't be unjustified situations and everyone gets acknowledged as they are involved. This is a reflection from a PhD student, and she refers to Vancouver guidelines, which we will take a look at in a later lecture. Then the problem of time and space. and this is a quote, an aphorism from Piet Hein, a Danish mathematician, art designer, and poet, and he says, of all human inventions, time is the most stupid, because the only thing you can use it for is to boil eggs, end of quote. But many young PhD students, they struggle with time and space, delaying getting data to start analysis, to do the right things in planning a huge project that will extend such a long time, afraid of throwing the time away. Practical issues like waiting for handing of the PhD application. I thereby also had to wait for several months to get a PC with connection to the University of Oslo network. Delays in breeding animals, etc., pushback plans, how to plan, structure time and workload, reorganization of my free time, necessity to get used to working during the weekend and improve the time management. Recruitment phase was slower and more time consuming than I expected, both for me and the healthcare workers involved. Getting the paper accepted for publication takes a long time. Things take a lot longer than expected. It is difficult to see what has been achieved so far in my PhD and difficult to know how fast I shall be progressing. I will, for the course of the time, I will not read this. Then the problem of translation. Though this is mainly a methodological project, there are still some ethical questions that might arise. The biggest one, I think, is the prospect of my techniques actually being used someday to suggest a drug combination for a specific patient. Who has the final responsibility in this setting? What if there is a bug in the algorithm I wrote? Question mark. Public accountability. As researchers, you also have an obligation towards the general public. For example, when you spend public resources, you have to spend those resources in a justifiable way. Knowledge dissemination outside the research community. Yes, as a researcher, you have certain obligation. Economic incentives. Is it justifiable to recruit research subjects and informants through paying them a small amount? Can researchers receive funding from pharmaceutical industry and still retain sufficient integrity and independence in the research? Very important question. And then finally, one of the PhD students raises this challenge related to the North-South dimension. Is research related to cancer immunotherapy really fair? Most grant applications are granted because the research harbors great financial potential. IPS on immunotherapy. This will lead to personalized medicine only available for the rich, yet no impact will be seen in poor countries.